Hey, listeners, today's topic, we're going to talk about advice that we would give our 30-year-old self. And you'll hear from me, you'll hear from John, as always, and then also Anthony Marino, frequent guest, will be on. And you'll get three different perspectives on advice and what would we go back and tell our 30-year-old self, regardless if you're 20, 30, or 80. Hopefully there'll be some wisdom in there and some takeaways that you can take and apply to your life. Hello, listeners. Welcome to Tales of Abundance, Why Settle for Less? I'm here again, as always, with John Oberg and also frequent guest contributor Anthony Marino on the podcast today. And we are going to be talking about what advice would you give your 30-year-old self? And this came up a couple weeks ago. A guy that I was coaching actually asked me if I could go back and talk to my 30-year-old self. What would you tell yourself? And I thought it was a fantastic question and made me think about it. I had answers I gave him and then more answers I thought of going on. So you're going to hear from Anthony and John, and let's jump in. John.
Oh, man, I love and hate this question because I first ask what I'd tell my 30-year-old self, then I say, have I actually listened? So do I need to tell my today self too? I don't always love that answer. Like it's like, okay, I would say X, Y, and O.
Yeah.
Still need to think about that.
So what's the first one?
I wrote a very similar letter to my two kids who've turned 18, and my 14-year-old will get a similar copy of the letter. And it really is about the most important decisions you make in your life. And I think it starts when you're 18 or so, like graduating high school, that age. And the things that I tell them in this letter are about the three most important decisions you make in your life. And then I talk about how you make those decisions. So it's how do you make decisions? What are the three most important decisions you're going to make in your life? And then the letter kind of closes out about gratitude and resilience. And that's this letter that they get. And it's interesting because I've seen my son print the letter and keep a copy on his desk and go back to it again and again. And it's been a really gratifying experience to talk about it with him occasionally, but watch him and engaging with it more often. And I wish I'd had that letter, when I was 18 years old.
Let's start with the first one. How do you make decisions?
Yeah.
I mean, what is the general advice there?
I think there's lots of great ways to make decisions. For me, I am a technician when I'm not naturally talented, and I don't think I have very many natural talents, which means I have to go learn, like, what's the step-by-step to do something. So as an example, I'm better at baking in the kitchen than I am at cooking, because baking is like, use exactly this much flour, use exactly this much butter. And so I just do better at that. And so I tried to provide a framework for my kids that says, there's lots of ways to make decisions, but here's one that can work. And it starts with just like listing all the options I'm faced with. Like, what decision am I trying to make? What are the options, right? And if there's obvious bad choices, get rid of the obvious bad choices right away. Then list the pros and the cons of each option. And then take a deep breath and consider, like, is there an intuition or a gut about each one? And which one gives me peace and which one makes me feel anxious? Right. And then, check in on that. And then I think seeking wise counsel for big decisions, people who've made that decision previously, to understand their pros and cons and what may come of it for me. And it's important to make a decision for you, for my son, or for me, or for my daughter, or whatever the case may be. But I think seeking wise counsel can help be a sounding board, and then repeat the peace and anxiety thing, and then start the plan, whichever path you think you're going down, and go through the whole process again if it's a really big decision to make sure you're on the right path. And so that's how and when I talk about like big life decisions, who you're going to marry, what your vocation is going to be, like it's a process that may take some time, but it's smart to be deliberate and to go through it. And I think a lot of people aren't as deliberate as they wish they would have been in retrospect.
Okay. Anthony,
not my process. I stole this from someone.
Okay.
This has been a process for 400 years that has been used. Like I don't want to hold out like I made this up. I totally stole this from someone smarter than me.
Fair enough. I think most of the things all of us think we stole from somebody else. One time or another, somebody stole it from somebody, and we're probably the eighth in the chain.
Truth for me.
But Anthony, is that how you make decisions, or is that a line? Or
well, I want to go back a little bit because John dodged the question. So what is the one thing you would tell your 30-year-old self?
There wouldn't be one thing. I want the one thing. You get one thing. That's the rule of this show. Be deliberate.
Be deliberate.
Be deliberate. Yeah. And these are the things you want to be deliberate about.
Yeah. For me, it would be to not be as selfish as I was. And I would probably have to be reminded of that at 35, at 40, at 45. As you coming up in a career, your focus may cause anxiety and problems with other people. And what I've learned is the less selfish you are and the more giving you are, the more you get back. You'll have some disappointments along the way where you really laid it on the line for somebody and they let you down. But the vast majority of time, the return on investment is terrific. It's like the stock market. You're not going to win at every stock choice you make. But if you make good choices and you're deliberate in your decision making and you study and you pick the right companies, you're going to do okay in the long run. And looking back on a long career, too many decisions were made with a myopic view of the future. Going back to your process, unfortunately, and again, not to pick on John, but I so enjoy it.
As do I.
So many.
Not everyone can be right like me.
Well, you know what, John? I can agree with you, and that way we both can be wrong. But we won't do that. Unfortunately, you're faced with a need to make a decision without a lot of time. It's great. I agree with marriage and your job, and as you reflect on things and you can make notes as, am I in the right vocation? Am I married to the right person? All those things are true, and I absolutely agree with that process. But I think what we have to learn is what are your core values around your decision making? Who are you? Are you, self-centered and you're going to make those kinds of decisions, or are you a real thoughtful person and you're more inclined to think of others before yourself, and that may change the decision that you make in an instant. And we're faced with decisions, hundreds and hundreds of them a week. So that takes a lot of work and a lot of reflection, and I don't think most of us do that well. So I think that's something we got to think about and work on.
Yeah, I know for me, I feel like a lot of the better decisions I've made has been when I followed my gut and I listened to that little intuition more than if I get too logical in the process, I maybe don't get into, I think what Anthony said was really wise with the core values and what we believe in. And instead of sometimes doing what felt right, I do what's logical. That generally hasn't worked out as well for me.
But even core values are a decision you have to make, right? Like you go through this whole process. Yeah. If you're choosing, like my core values haven't changed substantially since I wrote them down the first time, with one exception. And the exception was because I got it wrong the first time. Like I wrote some words down that didn't really mean what I wanted them to mean, but they weren't purely aspirational. And so I went through that same process of decision making to choose core values. But I think a lot of people, they choose core values that feel good to talk about or that they're aspirational versus what's really critically important to them. And so to me, the core values and how you make decisions are about what you do when no one's looking. Right? That's the real question about core values. And that's a whole different episode on core values for sure.
Yeah, that would be one where I would agree it takes some time, right? Like I spent a long time doing core values exercises personally and for the company. And we have a whole episode on that, previous episode.
Yeah.
So I agree with that.
But I think, back up, the one thing I want to say about decisions, there are decisions that you can unwind, and I think those require less deliberation, right? So like if I'm going to make a decision that like I can go back and change that decision in the face of new information quickly, easily, painlessly, like I'm very comfortable making decisions very quickly in that circumstance because there's something I can unwind. I think when you choose your career path or your vocation or the people you're going to spend the most of your time with, like those are things that are much harder to unwind, that are much bigger investments. And so I do agree with you that learning how to make decisions quickly is important, but the right type of investment of energy based on the seriousness of the decision is important, and knowing which decisions are important or not. Like, I've told the kids recently, like there are things you'll be faced with in your late teenage years that can change your life forever if you make bad decisions. Like we have a friend who had another friend who we don't know, whose daughter tried some drug I don't know what it was. It was a pill. It was laced with fentanyl and killed that child after one attempt to try drugs. Like, there are just some decisions that are so big and so fast. Those are the ones that I think require more deliberations.
Yeah, I think one of an area where I'm coming from in some sense with the core values is once you've kind of established that and practiced that, right? We all know that you have to live your values for a while before they become instinctive.
Sure.
And that will help in the decision making. Once you're instinctive about your core values, then the decisions you make that affect other people, most importantly, have a better chance of being the right decision. You know, I always use, it's not a great analogy, but I call it the domino effect. You know, every decision is the first tip over of the domino. It affects something.
The butterfly effect.
And
sure.
and it affects the next thing and the next thing. And particularly running businesses and under the gun, many times we move too quick. You know, those are business decisions and they can be unwound, but they can also have had lasting effects on people if there was a layoff or a promotion that you shouldn't have done and things like that. So I always try to check myself, and I don't do it all the time. You know, again, use your instinct. Sometimes your instinct is right. Sometimes it's wrong. What's the effect? Who is this going to affect? What is this going to affect? Why is it going to affect it? So
that's the wise counsel part. The bigger the decision, the more wise counsel you need to seek. I think that's the whole approach. And that's why I tried to think through, like, when going back to my younger self, I wish someone had told me earlier, like, your choice of vocation, your choice of who you spend time with. And then the third choice that I shared with my kids was, what are you going to believe in that's bigger than yourself? Back to your selfishness versus selfless. Like, we're a community animal. So I want my kids thinking about what's bigger than them. And then I want them doing that with gratitude and with resilience. Like, I think those are the things that they're going to need. And I'm trying to think about what they're going to need in the next 50, 60 years, for their life, for their career, for their relationships, and the things they may not be getting as naturally in their environment as I wish they would.
Yeah, my thoughts on the wise counsel, I'm thinking about, I've always reached out and got counsel on a lot of things. And a lot of the best decisions I've made were exactly the opposite of what the wise counsel.
Sure.
Right? And I remember my dad, me doing things and just shaking his head and being like, all right, I think this is a mistake, but good luck, right? And so, but at other times the wise counsel has been really beneficial to me, right? It's helped me avoid mistakes or potholes, or sometimes it's like, if you're going to do this, be careful of this.
I think great wise counsel shouldn't be telling you what to do. It should be telling you what their experiences were and what to look out for as you make a choice one direction or the other. The mentors that I've appreciated the most, and the mentor that I certainly hope that I try to be, is like not saying do this, don't do that, but instead saying, hey, if you go left, here's what might happen. If you go right, here's what might happen. And, what are we not thinking about? What are the unintended consequences? And being a really astute sounding board and hopefully not projecting their own experiences on to you, hopefully.
All right. So decision making. So that's one. And my first one, by the way, was networking, or who are your five having a better five is the answer I gave this person. And as I thought about it, it sticks there that was a challenge for me. When, I think the people that I had some friends that we had a lot of fun, but I certainly did not maximize for career success or a lot of other things with who the five were.
Yeah, so for the listener, we've talked about this previously,
Yeah.
which is, it's been said by many people that you're the average of the five people you spend the most time with. You're talking about the five people you spend the most time with. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and I think there were opportunities for me to have more success earlier and be surrounded by smarter people that were probably better aligned with where I was going than a lot of the people that I associated with, who, a lot of those I'm still in touch with and they're friends, but we weren't on the same life path either.
And there are people that migrate into your five and out of your five during life
Right.
stages. We've talked about that before too.
Yeah. But, if I think about who the five were that I maximized for, if I was in college, for example, there was zero thought of networking for success, right? Or moving forward. It was, okay, who can I hang out with? Who can I have fun? Who can I watch the game with or go to this party with or play basketball with or whatever it was, right? And so I would go back and really be much more intentional with what do I want to accomplish, where am I going, and what conversation should I be having, and who should I be hanging out with to help me get there.
Yeah, I think, yeah, my watch out for myself was, but not being quid pro quo about it. Like, because I was oftentimes early in my career, I was like, what can this person do for me? And I find that to be a little distasteful about the way that I treated people. And so I don't think that's what you're saying, by the way. I think you're saying, like, who are the people that I want to be on the journey with? Right question. The way that I took that when I was young is, what can you do for me now? And that was the wrong question. And so I think it's a subtle difference with a big implication for how you treat people.
Well, the hierarchy of companies, it's a bit different now. I mean, the hierarchy of companies back in the day, the 90s and prior, you had bosses who wanted you to have mentors, and there were things to do. And if you even go back into school, you had certain teachers that were delivering a message to you that was forming your opinions and so forth. And they may not have been wise counsel, right? They were just, for whatever reason, you were impressionable and you followed that lead, and it turned out not to be the right path for you. We're on top of that, and there are differences between men and women generally, but specifically, and it's not 100% of the cases, women are much better at seeking out counsel and collaborating before they make even little decisions. Men tend to be the hero, and I got this, so I'm going to make this decision. I may have got a little bit of help. I might have studied a little bit, but I'm making the decision. I know from experience, when my wife makes a decision, she's talked to 5 or 6 people, and it's believe me, moving her off that decision is much harder than it would be to move me off a decision when she points out, have you thought about?
Yeah, I don't know. I was with you all the way up to the last part where you say you move off your decisions easier. Bullshit.
No, I didn't say I
okay.
No, I didn't say that.
Okay, all right.
I said, if she points out or someone points out something I hadn't thought about, I'm likely to reconsider the decision. It may already be underway, hard to unwind, but I might reconsider, start to doubt it, and maybe, pull over into the breakdown lane, think about it a little bit more, and then re-navigate myself to it in a direction similar to what might be done. But that first decision, I'll just make it.
Yeah, most people, I would say that as a psychological kind of generalism, is that once someone's made a decision about something, it's generally hard to move them away from that decision.
Agreed.
And new information can be helpful for some people, and for some people more than others. And some people are probably more prone to being analytically paralyzed. And maybe it's a man-woman thing. I don't know, maybe it's not. But I can think of plenty of women who would self-identify with the way you handle things, and men more like Jan. And so, but the reality is, I think being aware of what your shortcomings with decision-making are, and where you can get stronger, like that's the real benefit here. Is like what's the strength and weakness of my decision-making process, and where can I get better? And then who can be around me that I'm going to listen to? I've had some of my friends give me unsolicited advice, and I don't love that, but I know that their intention is they're trying to help me. It's just not always easy to hear.
Okay. Let's move to the second one. So, John, you have decision-making. What was the second thing on your letter?
Well, it was decision-making as a process. Then I went into the 3 important decisions you make. And those, again, were, who you spend your time with, your choice of your profession, and then what do you believe in that's bigger than you? Like those are the 3 decisions.
The who you spend your time with aligns with what I said with who are your 5,
that's
right?
Yep,
so I think we've covered that one. So the next one was your profession.
Yeah, just what you're going to do vocationally. And that vocation might be the job that you have. That's some people's vocation. Some people have a job, but their vocation is in volunteer work outside of that job or in their family. Some people, their vocation is their family. Like, I think however you describe vocation, like the thing you're doing to make a productive society.
Why is that such a big thing?
Because you spend most of your time in your life doing it waking. Like, most of your waking hours in your life are spent on your vocation. And I think that is going, my belief system is that you don't chase happiness directly, that happiness is a byproduct of a life well lived, and your vocation is going to take up the vast majority of your time. So that the byproduct of joy and happiness versus the choice you make for joy, those are two separate things in my world, just my mental model. Like, I think you're gonna have a better life if you chose something you're designed to do.
How about, so here's a question. You said designed. Something I have on my list further down is follow your passion.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think this is an area you tend to lean more into the, I'm good at this, therefore I should do it.
No. Come on, you've seen my 4 questions. Try again.
But
What are the 4 questions, Randy? Come on, you know my 4 questions. What are you good at? What are you passionate about? How do you want to spend your time, energy, and resources? And then how do you want to make your mark on the world?
And
do I have a choice? 5 would be, do I have a choice to use 1 through 4? So I think it's, I'm trying to be nice about this, but I don't know if I can. The society in which we live may or may not give you the opportunity to use those 4 things because of the economic conditions that you're living under and what must happen for you to survive. Okay, so Maslow's hierarchy tells us, we've got to, there's the base. We have to survive.
Sure.
And it's very intellectual of us to pontificate about these highfalutin choices that we can make when Dad was left and I graduated high school and I don't have the grades to go to college nor the money and I don't really have a trade skill. What do I do? Well, I got to go survive.
Yeah, I mean, the fifth circle in Ikigai is, what do I get paid for? And so when you overlap paid for in there, then you get something at the center. And so the paid for circle is where you get in through Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And then as you go through Maslow's hierarchy, you move from the outside of the Ikigai toward the center of the Ikigai. Okay. And so I think that's absolutely relevant. But at the end of the day, it's not just what I'm passionate about.
My observation, John, and I'm not, again, this isn't a judgment. I don't think that the answer is right for everybody, by the way. I'm not saying this trying to, I got you, or that's not my intention here at all. My observation with you and what you value, back to what Anthony talked about earlier, if you see an opportunity that has great financial and somebody wants to do something over here, you tend to lean toward, how do we maximize this and then use it toward that thing you're passionate about, is more like, how do you use the income here and do this, is where you would tend to go first, at least.
I think with you, what you've heard is the from to. Like, how do you get from where you are to where you want to go with the least amount of unnecessary risk? And so I do talk a lot about risk, and how you actually look at asymmetrical risk versus reward. I mean, for sure I look at that because I think, you know more about this than me, having played professional poker. You're constantly calculating that asymmetry.
Yeah, all I'm saying is, again, not making a judgment which one's right or wrong. I tend to lean more toward follow your passion, right? In picking that career, and that the success, I get both, right? There's the practical part Anthony's talking about. You've got to make a living. You've got to feed your family. And by the way, when you get past those basic needs, if you can make an extra couple $100,000 a year, you can do all this other stuff over there, right? I can argue both sides of this. I'm just saying that I think most people either they maximize one or the other. I don't think very many people are balanced.
Yeah, I don't know, man. I have inside information. I don't want to like what's it called when you bring out someone's, is it doxing? When you tell someone's secrets? Is that what it's called? Is that?
No, doxing is more like name, address, where they live.
Oh yeah, okay.
Like that.
Well, I mean, you've given me inside information that I don't want to share on the air, but I would say that if you'll let me, I can talk to you about, you say that you do things one way, but my experience with you might be something different.
I'm not saying I've even made the choices right. I mean, some of that's been, to Anthony's point, there's choices I would like to have made different following a passion in the last however many years. But some of it is, there's a mortgage to pay and there's mouths to feed and college to pay for. And I have made that decision, even if I maybe haven't made the right decision. I'm not saying I followed what's best for me always.
Yeah, I mean, you and I have had conversations where there's a lot more than mouths to feed in your household. Like you've been very sensitized to like the families of the people that work with you and how to take care of those people too. Like it's a much more selfless endeavor for you. And I think that back to Anthony's point about like being selfless and doing what you've set out to do for a reason, for a time period. I don't think there's a right path. I don't think that anyone's career path is like, you should choose your career this way. I think there's a way of viewing the landscape that is as holistic as it can be. I think the Japanese Ikigai, which is where I kind of drew my inspiration from in the 4 questions you've heard for years, what that does is it draws a picture for people where they can make those choices with as much information as is reasonable. And the way that I might counsel you to do that might be different than the way I counsel Anthony to do that. But really, my role when I'm in that kind of coaching seat is to help someone see the entire landscape and then make a good decision for them. Not to project what I think they should do, but to help them see it more clearly. And if they're missing something, then to call that out.
Yeah, I'd like to change the world by figuring out a way to start this thought process at a much younger age. You know, for a long time, and it may be changing a little bit now, for a long time it was go to school, go to college, get a job, you know, be better than your parents, you know, make more money than your parents, and so on and so forth.
Do you know where that came from, by the way?
I don't know.
Super interesting. Can we take a quick turn here?
Go ahead. Good.
This was designed by the robber barons to institutionalize our school system so they could have a docile workforce for an industrialized nation.
Right.
So like this is a part of how they decided we needed to be trained so that they could have a good worker for their factory.
Right.
Like in that, I don't think that method serves us in the best way today.
No, obviously it doesn't. And so, you know, the how, that's the what. The how is how do we teach younger people, and I don't know what age you start at, you know, identifying what they're good at, identifying what their passion is, and then teaching them what that means in terms of the economics somewhere down the road. You know, someone learning Fortran programming and they're good at it and they're passionate about it doesn't do them much good in today's society, right? Those of you that don't know what Fortran is, look it up. Go to ChatGPT and look it up. Or punch cards, right?
Anthony is going to show us he has a vacuum tube computer at home.
Hey, it worked. So, you know, I think it's a huge issue, and it's a continuing issue as you get into a rhythm of what you are actually doing at various stages of your life. I mean, it's hard to break away from an environment that's providing economic security or some level of security or survival. It's hard to break away from that and go do something different. I mean, I was very fortunate in my career to have some really good jobs, high-paying jobs. The opportunities that I missed were half a dozen times. People wanted to front me the money to go start my own business in those industries. And I looked at it and I said, well, no, I'm making a ton of money, and I got kids that are ready to go to college, or I got to take care of that. So I took the easy, quote unquote, easy path, and didn't break away till I was 60 years old. I was 60 years old when I started my first business.
Two things jump out at me. One, it just hit me that I need to talk to my kids about the power of their own habits, good, bad, and ugly. And I'm going to add habits to this letter, and I'm going to resend a letter that talks about deliberately choosing what habits so you don't get hijacked by the wrong habits. I think that's one thing I just made a note of right here. And the second thing is I read a note from a private equity firm that studied I think it was 700 different private equity firms that were venture capital, private equity. And they looked at who the most successful entrepreneurs were. It was generally people that had 20 or more years in their industry with 3 or more founding partners of that venture. Most entrepreneurs don't start at 20 in terms of percentage of success. Most entrepreneurs start, decades later, and they understand their industry, their problem set, those things. And so maybe you actually made great decisions. I would just reframe that thinking in that,
Well, but my passion was to get out from under the man, and I didn't do it. And I had people were going to write me checks.
Yeah.
That were going to, go look at, you need to go do this, and we will help you do it. And I just couldn't, I didn't have the spine to give up what I had for what I might have. So anyway.
By the way, I looked up before I added to what John said, the part about the education system I knew was right, but I also thought it had something to do with war. I asked Grok, and Grok confirmed. It's based on the Prussian model, by the way, and part of it was the education system for the factories, but also part of it was to make people more nationalistic and make better soldiers, people more willing to fight for the country.
That's where they got it from, yeah. Not
so it was that combination of things. And I thought that was true, but Grok confirmed. So assuming that's confirmation.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Anthony, we've talked about picking a career. What's your second piece of advice you would give 30-year-old Anthony? Last time it was be less selfish and have a longer timeline. So what would be step 2?
Be very conscious of the people around you and what they're contributing to your success or your journey. And it's not just mentors. It's what am I learning from my peers and frankly from my subordinates? And I use those terms. I don't like any of those terms, but that's just the nature of the kind of businesses I grew up in. I learned a ton from my subordinates, some of whom have gone on to be CEOs of other companies or other C-suite type relationships. And it wasn't until mid-career that I realized that I was actually there for them. My purpose was to help them achieve what they wanted to achieve. We used to throw people into management training programs, whether they liked it or not. If they were a good something, you're going into management training. And, they went and failed because they didn't want that kind of responsibility. They wanted to be an individual contributor. And, we never thought that, who the heck would want to be an individual contributor? Don't you want to be a manager? I remember those days very, very clearly. And I see the bodies at the side of the road.
Great book about that. Marcus Buckingham wrote First Break All the Rules, where he talks about companies need to have a path for growing as an individual contributor, as a technical master, not just a manager. A great, great book.
Yeah. And having an understanding of, some people are in an environment working so that they can get to something else. I've told a story about the nurses at the LA call center. We found out we had these great and talented people that were leaving to go back to nursing school and so forth. And they wanted to stay, but we wouldn't change their schedules. Well, what a easy solution.
Right.
And, so we did that and we graduated tens and tens of people from nursing school. They ultimately left us, but man, they were great contributors during that time. So that's the thing I would tell them, is to think about others and the impact you can have on others, and then what it does for you. And that call center became the highest performing call center we had after we made changes, not just with the nurses, but with single moms, single dads, people that had life changes, so they needed a schedule change. In the old days, we just tell them no. In the new day, we told them, all right, whatever.
So let's go back to the learning from the people that you work with, whether, they're your boss or they, quote unquote, work for you. I mean, I always hear the quote that if you don't hire people smarter than you, or I'm screwing up the quote, but the concept is if you don't hire people smarter than you, you're not going to grow. You're not going to get maximum results, right? There's a better saying for it, but you get the gist, right? So how did you learn that? How did you learn to hire smart people?
It wasn't so much that. What I learned was people are generally smart, right? So they're pretty good. If you just, you don't have to go find the person with the highest SAT score or, whatever measure of intelligence you want. You have to break that hierarchy I told you about. In big companies in particular, this hierarchy of decision-making where we made this decision and this is the way it's going to be. If you can figure out how to break the rules by letting and listening to the subordinates and peers give you guidance on the decisions you're going to make, back to this thoughtful process about decision-making, you're going to get input that you hadn't thought about. The subordinate is a form of a domino, right? He's one of the dominoes in that. Well, hey boss, I don't know if if you do this, then this, and then that, and then this. And it changes the whole process. Hard to do in big companies because you're supposed to be there to be the decision maker in that C-suite job or in that senior management position and so forth. But if you can finesse that and get the nuances of it, I think it's, whether in a big company or a small company.
But not most managers today have the, I don't know if it's willingness or ability, but what they don't do is they don't drive all the way down to 10 feet of altitude and then come back up to 10,000 feet of altitude, then drive down to 10 feet. Like they don't have the command of what's happening under them in a lot of cases, or the patience or the empathy. And it's really problematic.
Yeah. That's why we're here to teach that.
Yeah.
So pay attention. This is life. These are life lessons that you can use. This is absolutely real. And, even in a small entrepreneurial business, a startup, you're inclined as the guy with the money on the table or the person with the money on the table to be forceful in your decision making and so forth. When, if you can discipline yourself to take a minute and ask your number two or number three, and there may only be 3 or 4 of you in the whole darn company, ask everybody, and you have a change management process, John,
Yep.
that I think covering that here is interlaced with what we're talking about.
We can do that, but I'm going to take you back to Randy's question because you went way off the deep end. Like you just busted my chops on a few minutes ago.
Okay.
He talked about hiring people smarter than you in the jobs.
Mm-hmm.
And I would go back and say, I don't think it's about hiring someone smarter than you. I think it's hiring the best person for the job that might be better than you at the job. Like there are very few jobs that I'm going to be the best at, but there are lots of jobs and companies I work with where people are going to be better than me at those jobs. And so recognizing one that I'm not going to be better than them over the long haul, I might not even be wired for that job. My brother-in-law does environmental drilling, and he's really great at that. And I could never, my wife, she's like, I would never want to work in a sales role again. And then it's a place that I can do okay. And so, but her job, like I don't have the skill set for that. And so anyway, the bottom line is that I think it's not about finding the smartest people or the most people like you, which is a common mistake that people make. It's projecting themselves onto something else. And so the lesson for my 30-year-old self would be have enough self-awareness and enough self-assuredness that you can bring in someone who will be better than you and enough confidence to manage them, right? I mean, Michael Jordan was not the best basketball coach in the NBA. Stan Van Gundy could never have been a 15-time Hall of Fame All-Star basketball player. I don't think he was a basketball player at all in the NBA, was he? You'd know better than I would. Stan Van Gundy?
No, I don't even know. He probably played in college. I have no idea I'm pretty sure he was never in the NBA.
Exceptional coach, right? And so, and then you have people who do both. Phil Jackson was a great NBA player and a great NBA coach. And so I think having enough self-confidence to know you don't have to be the very best at it to manage it.
Yeah, I think it's more than that, John. I don't think anyone tries to not hire good people. I think it comes with recognition after they're in the jobs. And I can think of several examples where it was clear that a subordinate under a particular division head or general manager clearly was going to become something special. And that division head or that GM or that manager suppressed that person's opportunity.
Oh, for sure.
And so we all try to hire good people. They pass the test, they go through the panels and so on and so forth. It's the recognition of that special talent and then drawing it out of it, giving that person assignments, give them the opportunity to show what they can do, give them.
But self-awareness too. Well, yeah, but Anthony, there's also a self-awareness like, hey, I've hit my limit in this place and this person may surpass me. So what's my next step in my career without feeling threatened by them?
No, that's what I'm saying.
But the reality is, you are threatened by them. It could be career limiting. Some people don't act in the best interest of the company, and that's where somebody outside of that dynamic has to step in and be aware of what's happening. I don't think it's reasonable that people are then going to do the right thing. I think then someone outside of that dynamic has to step in and help that really talented subordinate through that process. Like there have to be. It's not a reasonable thing to ask the manager to push the employee past them. That'll happen in some cases, but not regularly.
Yeah, I'm not so much saying push them past them, but recognize the talent, understand where that person wants to go. And if there's a path for them that you can open up, then you do it. We are in a dynamic right now in this country. There's a very large 4-letter word technology company that I know very well that is in the process of hacking off every employee over 50 years old and giving them a package, getting them out the door, and bringing in talented people that are much lower dollar amount. And it's a business strategy, right? So how do those people feel? How do the 48-year-old men and women feel? Are they going to devote time and attention to the 36-year-old to help them be ready to take them over at 50? I don't know. This whole thing could unravel and backfire on these companies. That the environment creates.
Are we still in the 30-year-old self here?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I think that point is like, what are you going to do to be a lifelong learner is what I'm taking from you. Because I think the people that are 48, 50 years old who are more expensive because of their seniority, whatever, so the question that I would be asking, and I do ask myself this, like, what value am I adding? Like, am I adding the value to justify, right, the paycheck?
Yeah, no, what I'm saying is that we're talking about recognizing talent and helping it, nurture it,
Sure.
and help it get worse. I think companies are may hinder that because, a 50-year-old's still got a runway, right? And I'm not so sure that if I'm in their position, if I'm working to nurture somebody now, am I really going to hire the best person? Am I really going to nurture that talent? Or am I going to, have my department be so bare of talent that I'm the only person that can run this department? So I don't know. It's a little off topic, but it just makes me think about behavior.
It's a failure of the person above them to show that 50-year-old a career path. Like, my take on that situation would be, who's given the 50-year-old the career path to 60 and 70? Who's talking to them about that? And if you don't have the expertise to do that in your company, then bring in someone from the outside to have that conversation and help them with career planning.
So I want to go back to the question is, really what I'm asking is hiring good people. Whether John talks about the best person for the job, I think trying to hire people smarter than you is a good strategy. And acknowledged, people are scared of it. But I just don't think they should be. I think that if you consistently go look for the best people, even if you think they're going to be better than you, that also shows your wisdom and your value. Like, that's a way to set yourself apart because you are willing to bring on the best people, build the best team. That in itself is a skill that even if they're smarter than you, they may not be better than you. And you can rise. Like, I really think that, this podcast is called Tales of Abundance. And if you go out and you build it and it gets bigger, I just believe everybody wins.
Yeah, I was talking to a friend of mine, Major General Ken Weegan was a 1-star general who got promoted to 2-star. And shortly after getting a 2nd star, decided that he was going to move on to the next part of his career. And I said, Ken, that's amazing that you're making that decision. And you just got to this new role. Like, I'm curious how you drove that decision. And he said, well, it's time. This billet is for somebody else, and I've done the things I need to do here. And it was such a selfless and courageous and such a great act of leadership that he was like, I'll go find the next thing. Like, that's my career progression. And he really had a very, I thought it was really healthy view of how he was going to, even though he may not have had the exact answer, he was very abundance minded, to use our language, about that. And I think that's just a great demonstration of leadership. I think a lot of people have some uncertainty in that. My point of view is that oftentimes when we think things are really certain, they're less certain. And when we think things are really uncertain, they're less uncertain. Like, it's never as bad as it seems. It's never as good as it seems. And I think we just need to be honest with that about, as we talk to employees or staff or partners, I think we just need to, I'd like to see people be more sober about the reality of a situation. It's never as good as it seems. It's never as bad as it seems, but that's why I think all the stuff we talk about, life planning, career planning, that's why, that's why we talk about it.
Adjacent to your question about, or not question, your comment about hiring smarter people, a lot of our audience is entrepreneurs or people that are thinking about starting businesses. So it isn't just about intelligence. It's about bringing the next person on that has a skill better than the skill that you could employ in that role.
Yeah.
So so intelligence is one thing, but skill, and maybe that's a definition of intelligence.
We could just say hire better people, right? A employees, if you want to look at it that way.
That's a much better. I think that's way better. I think we correlate like really smart to being great at what they do, and that's just not always the case. Right. I think it's the right person for the job is the right thing.
Yeah. What's the definition of an A player?
I mean, the technical definition I've seen is that if you take a pay band for a skill set, they're in the top 6% of performers in return on investment of that pay band and skill set. And then you can get that data through like performance data and through salary data.
Yeah. So is that person on a piece of paper, or is this, how do you identify that human being?
I was going to say it's somebody that's excellent at their job, right?
When I interview people, we measure certain things. Like every job description has certain measures of success, and you can ask them how they've measured that success in the same role previously, and you can figure out if they're best in class, middle of the road, or not best in. Like I think there's ways to measure that in a stress-based behavioral interview. That's another topic for another day, probably. But I think you can measure. I'm not saying you can measure it scientifically, like with absolute precision, but you can definitely get in the ballpark consistently. And I don't think it's a gut feel unless you're one of a very few people who has a natural talent for that.
All right. With that, let's go to break. We'll take a break. When we come back, we'll go into my second piece of advice for 30-year-old self.
Love it.
Great.
All right, listeners, welcome back to Tales of Abundance. Why settle for less? We are talking about advice that we would give to our 30-year-old self. So John and Anthony have given their first two. My second one would be simply to ask better questions. And that's, I guess I went through a lot of things figuring that out myself and having to just thinking.
How do you know you're asking bad questions or not good enough? Like how do I hear that, but like if you said to my 30, I'd be like, okay, well, how do I know that I'm not asking great questions? No.
So I think I just went with the flow too much. I wasn't deliberate enough, intentional enough. And I think, the better questions would be things like, what do you really want? Or what's the outcome that you're really after? And so a lot of that is really being clear on what I want, or what would have to be true. There's things that I think I just discounted and I thought, I can't do that. It wasn't true. I couldn't do it with my current circumstances. And I should have been asking what would have to be true, or what would have to change, or what would have to not be true to get the answer I want, to be able to pursue what I really wanted. Or, a question I like is, what would it look like if it was 10x bigger, 10x better, 10x easier, 10x more efficient? And, thinking at scale, what's the best model? That's something you're great at, John, is you look at things and go into, what have people done that have had this success in the past, and how do I copy it, right? And I have really just gotten better at that. I mean, for me, it took doing ayahuasca, for God's sakes, to get that message across to myself. I mean, that was a big takeaway from that, instead of me having to start from the beginning. So just asking.
There's a lot of humility in that too, right? Like recognizing there's a whole world of information before you, and starting from the frontier of knowledge versus starting from what I know. Like that's it takes real humility.
Yeah. So just asking more questions, asking better questions would be the other piece of advice I would give to 30-year-old Randy. So John, let's go to the next one.
Oh, I mean, from the next one really is just I end the letter with talking about gratitude and resilience, and I think I tell my kids all the time, there's only two things in the world you can control: your thoughts and your actions. And so you're going to get emotionally triggered. You're going to have other, but how you react, how you act and think are the things you can control. And I think you can choose a perspective of gratitude, and you can choose to grow the skill set of resilience. And those are things, I think Stoicism is a great way to think about resilience. And I think that gratitude is a great way to position every day. And I think with those two things, for me, I've had a much happier life. And when I talk to people about those things, I just think broadly speaking and generally speaking, right? So I think there's people that have, mental health issues that are chemical in nature. I'm not talking about that. I'm just saying that by and large, gratitude and resilience, two things we can work on, and they make a really big difference for the vast majority of people.
I love that one. I wish it was on my list. I feel like that should be on everybody's list. So,
what are the tactics that you're going to teach your kids to leverage that?
I think there's a couple things. Like for gratitude, you guys have seen my journal, and so the gratitude journal says, "Today I'm grateful for," and I teach people, including my kids, if they want to use it, that like you can just copy yesterday's answer if you're not sure. Just find something you can be grateful for. There's always something you can be grateful for if you choose to look for it. And so that's just the daily practice of journaling and writing it down and being grateful. And you can do that in the morning for yesterday, or you can do it at the end of the day for today. And so that's gratitude. And then for resilience, it's really about what belief systems you're going to let go of and what you're going to choose to replace them with. And so, and without lying to yourself about it. Like, I don't like, when I was in high school, waking up at 5 o'clock in the morning, so I didn't say I love waking up at 5 o'clock in the morning. I said to myself, I want the outcome more than I dislike the input. Right. And so that's just that kind of a stoic approach to things. And so, I can't remember who I was talking to recently, but they were tweaked about something emotionally and they shared with me why, and it wasn't factually correct. And I was like, hey, I hear that you have that feeling, and I'm not saying that feeling is not a legitimate emotion, but the underlying thing that tweaked you isn't true. Would you like the set of facts? And then you can react to that. And for some people, the answer is no. And I get it. When you're tweaked, you're tweaked. I got it. Once my wife woke up and she dreamt about something about me and she was upset with me about it. I can't fix that. And she knew logically that was, not what she wanted, but that was just so emotions are emotions for real. How you deal with them is something different. So I think for people that are a little older than, high school, Marcus Aurelius wrote the book Meditations. I think maybe you've read Meditations at one point.
Parts of it.
Yeah. And have you read Meditations?
It sits on my dresser, and I probably read it a dozen times.
Yeah, it's such a great book for just how to handle emotions. And so I think when you talk about resilience, I think it's a skill set. You have to practice it. So it's a skill you learn the skill, and then you exercise and practice that skill to become more resilient. And it's not easy, but I think it's important. And that's what I would do.
All right. I love the gratitude one. I did just that, I actually think some of the earlier stuff we talked about, picking the right job, picking the right people, can help. All of that should be tied to the gratitude.
Yeah,
right?
That's
and,
right.
And if you have the right job, you're more likely to be grateful for that, or the right income, or whatever it is that creates that. Being around people that are grateful is a big decision, and picking that gratitude as well. So, all right, Anthony, what's your third one?
It's going to be my 40-year-old self, and I'm going to steal it from the father or the founder of Lululemon, Chip Wilson. He asked his dad was an aging hippie, probably 5 or 6 years older than I am right now, and he asked him, what would you tell your 40-year-old self? And I heard this about 10 years ago, so a little bit before I started my first company, and it was, just do it, just effing do it. So when I go back to those opportunities I had to start my own business, be funded by people that love me, I should have just done it. I should have just taken that trip. I should have not got on that plane, flown across the country, and missed my kids' Little League All-Star game. It's just do it. And the gratitude piece gives you the opportunity to stop and think about what's important and not just be reactive. So I would take that advice.
Yeah, I think that's great advice, right? I mean, I think very few people really regret the chances they take, right? We regret the ones we didn't take.
Yeah, absolutely.
The one, I don't know why I've thought about this recently. I hadn't thought about it in years, but when I was 22, 23 years old, I lived in Iowa at the time when it's still in my vector days. I was offered a state senate or state rep seat I was in a district where I just would have been automatically elected. The guy that had held the seat for 40 years was retiring. And this kind of goes back to my 5. And I didn't want to be a lifetime politician. I didn't want to sell my soul. I didn't want to have to say, yes, I will take your money to get elected. So then I just didn't want to have to owe people and go through all that BS. that is tied with politics. And I could see it that was there. But I think about it and I think, well, why didn't I just go do it for whatever a term was, 4 years or whatever it was? I think they only met 2 weeks a year. Like, who knows what opportunities would have sprang out of that and what I would have learned and what wisdom and connections and everything else. And I just, again, this kind of goes back to my 5. I didn't think that way then. I just didn't think about the value of that or really place any value in it. I wasn't smart enough or wise enough. But I absolutely should have said yes to that, even if it was for 4 years, just to get the experience.
I'm reading a book now that is one of the 3 books I'm reading. I think you maybe gave it to. Is The Square in the Tower? Is that one that you gave?
Wasn't me.
Did you give that one? It's about the network effect. So I'm only a few pages into it now. I'll tell you more about it some other episode. But it talks a lot about the network effect, which impacts your 5. So more to come on that one.
Yeah. So I think that's great advice, Anthony, is what I'm saying. I definitely could have heard that. Now, that would have been my 22 or 23 or your old self or something.
I think at a younger age, you're encumbered a little bit more than you are at 40. You know, there's a lot going on in your 20s. You know, you're just trying to determine who you are. And a lot of times you're not in a position to make a bold decision, you know, as we talked about earlier. But, you know, by the time you're 40, you should be well on your way to whatever you're on your way to. And you may be slightly better off financially and can take the risk and weigh that risk. So, yeah, when I think about that, and I think it takes the same thing at 50 and the same thing at 60. It's just do it with thought, right? With a clear decision strategy, but you know, take advantage of it because you know, as we'll talk about in later episodes, you know, life is pretty darn short, and at least this life.
And I think it applies to more than the job, right? It could be, like you said, it could be the trip. It could be asking out the girl. It could be whatever it is, right? Like, take the leap. And I think, yeah, because the regrets tend to be the leaps we don't take. So, good. My third one, I guess you guys both had 3. I put 4, but the 4th one we kind of covered was follow your passions, be more intentional. We've already talked about. So my other one was just think bigger. And I think, you know, it's interesting. A lot of the 5 I was surrounded with, again, this ties back to the 5, I was the big thinker in the group. And people used to comment all the time, like, oh my God, you think so big. But I really didn't. Not, you know, when I think of thinking big, I'm thinking Elon Musk thinks big, right? I mean, he's like, well, nobody's been able to have a private rocket company, and they've all failed, but I'm going to do this. I'm going to do it for a fraction of the budget. And oh, by the way, we're going to go to frickin' Mars, right? And everything he's done, like, that's really big thinking. I mean, that's another level, and there's other examples, but I was nowhere near that scale. And my thinking was big compared to people around me, but not big compared to society.
Oh, you used to think, you used to want, wasn't one of your dreams to own an NFL franchise?
I've always said that. So part of it is having $1 billion. And, you know, I've had money, lost money, had money, lost money. You know, the first thing with the internet company, I mean, there was a real shot at being a billionaire there if that thing went on a little further. And the only thing that would probably really be different in my life is I would have tried to buy the Vikings. That's it. Like, a lot of the other things just aren't that important to me. So yes, I would love to, like, that takes ungodly amounts of income. But a lot of the things that other people want money for are just not.
You know, one of the great questions we started asking each other in our group is, what would have to be true if? And so what would have to be true if you could be a part owner of the Vikings without having $1 billion? Like, maybe we don't think about that right now in this moment, but it just hit me, like, what would have to be true for you to not get to $1 billion, but still be able to be an owner of the Vikings?
I wouldn't want to be the part of it. I mean, that'd be better than nothing. But I want to be the Jerry Jones type. Like, I don't want to be meddling and be on the media and the press and all that like Jerry Jones. But I would want to actually be involved in the team.
So what would have to be true? Like, I don't know if we can answer in this very episode, but what would have to be true for you to have the influence you want to have on the team you love as you wear cardinal red today?
You'd have to marry his daughter. His daughter.
That's not going to happen. But...
Well, you never know.
Julie coming to get you.
All right. Honey, that was Anthony that said that?
Yes, yeah. Julie, that was Anthony that said that.
All right. All right. Anything you guys want to add to this list?
Julie, Anthony said that.
Yeah. It's all right. She's got a good sense of humor. Anything you guys want to add? Anything that you want to add beyond the three that we've had?
For me, I think it's just not just my 30-year-old self and me learning, but what do I want to be deliberate about passing on to my kids and other people? The habits one was the one that popped up for me today. Like, that's my takeaway is I need to make sure that I'm communicating that to my family is like because there are habits that are deliberate and there are habits that are accidental. And I think I'm going to go do a little audit on like, what are my accidental habits?
Yeah. And I would say that, to the listeners, irrespective of your age and condition and where you are in your career, I would be retrospective and look back and do this exercise because it may not be too late. And I'm a survey of one who started a business at 60 years old, went back and got his MBA at 40. It isn't too late. So reflect on it and be conscious of what your opportunities are and what would bring you joy and is your passion achievable?
Okay. Love it. So also, listeners, you can follow us on social media, wherever, Facebook, Twitter, or X as it's now called, Instagram, LinkedIn. I posted on there last night or yesterday afternoon asking followers what advice they would give. Vince Humphreys responded, who is a previous guest. You can listen to his episode if you haven't. But his answer was, learn to do what you love starting today. Darlene, who actually might be a good guest in the future as well, said, listen to that little voice on your shoulder, even if it's trivial, like take an umbrella. I saved myself a lot of time and heartache once I finally figured that out. So that's a couple of our listeners and the advice they gave. Another friend of mine texted me last night.
I love that section, by the way. We should do this more often. Keep going. I love this.
Okay. Another friend of mine texted me last night, and his answer was, don't sell your Bitcoin. And he just said he couldn't keep doing it because he kept making him sick because he had over 25,000 Bitcoin back in the day. He was a fellow poker player, and then he sold them. He didn't really understand it or think of it, but
he had 25,000
over
Bitcoin.
25,000, and
do the math real quick for me. At $100,000.
25 million.
I mean, no, 250 million, right? 25,000. So you'd have
no, that'd be 2.5 billion.
Okay.
I'm gonna do the math here. You guys keep going. I'm gonna do the I think it's 2.5 billion. I'm gonna find out.
It's pretty embarrassing that we can't move the zeros.
Let's see. So we'll see. So you have 25,000 times 1,000 is 25 million. Then 2.5 billion. Thank you. Yeah.
So in the billions. So he just said he kept typing it, and he finally he said it all just ties back to the Bitcoin. But he actually had a great perspective on it. He was like, he just said he probably wasn't ready for that kind of money and wealth, and it used to be used to move around poker sites and back in the day.
I hope he has at least 10 now.
Anyway, that was the answer from the users. So users, follow us on social media. We would love to get your input on future topics like this. In the meantime, download, give us a thumbs up, tell your friends, tell your family, and thank you for listening to Tales of Abundance. Why settle for less?
Thanks, Randy.